What burns longer, a red candle or a blue candle? Neither. They both burn shorter. I don't know. I feel like that wasn't the best, but last week was really good. So I'm really excited about our speaker today. Those of you who are fans of history, especially military history, history of veterans, I think will be excited to hear from our speaker as well. So today we're going to hear from Dr. Peter Cash. He has a PhD in U.S. history from the University of Memphis. He is the owner of Blue Yonder Research, which he was going to spend some time explaining what they do and how it relates to history and our veterans, and has 30 plus years of archival research in the U.S., Spain, and soon to be France. Everybody please welcome Dr. Cash.
Oh, thank you. How do I just, here you go, so forward, backward. Okay. There we are. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Peter Cash, or should I say, hello, I'm Peter Cash. Very distant relation before anyone asked. As you can see, I've got, what do I need to point at to advance? To the projector?
It'll pick it up.
It'll pick it up? We'll skip that because we just did the About Me slide. Well, as you know, I'm the owner, the chief everything, including janitor for Blue Yonder Research. I'm a one-man company. Started this about 3 years ago with the idea of putting skills that I had developed through decades of being a professional historian to work doing something other than just teaching college history classes. So I guess I can now call myself a professional researcher for hire. So what do researchers do? Well, one of the things I do quite frequently is to help families research a veteran's history. I meet people all the time who go, well, my great-grandpa was in World War I, but I don't know a thing about what he did. Well, maybe I can help you find that. I do a great deal of that through personnel files and other things that we'll get into in just a minute. I assist with larger projects as well. I'm currently working on a multi-year project with Johnsonville State Historic Park. The task I was given by the park manager was to recreate the story of a town that no longer exists. So what they wanted was for me to find out as much as I could about the people who lived there in the period after the Civil War and up until the time that Johnsonville ceased to exist when they built Kentucky Lake in 1944. So that's a tall order because I don't always know where to find things about these people. There are multiple cemeteries in the park, for example, with unmarked graves. So it's hard to even get a good picture on who lived there, and if they did pass away there, are they interred there or are they not? But I'm working through deed books, Civil War soldiers' pension records. I'm going to get into court cases with the county court to see what I can find. I'm looking at wills and probates and newspaper articles. So there are a number of ways that I can approach the topic, and as I work through it, I will get better and better. At this point, I've already identified about 20 Union Army veterans who lived in Johnsonville in the 1880s and 1890s, 14 of which were African Americans who settled there because that had been a Union Army outpost during the war. And I've also found 3 Confederate veterans so far. I'm sure there will be more, but I've just sort of begun to turn that page. I also work as a volunteer with a group called Doughboy MIA. Our goal is to find as much information as we can about missing Americans from the First World War. The U.S. government cannot look for them anymore because the agency charged with that no longer has that mandate. That mandate starts in 1941 and comes forward. So it's up to volunteers to try to do that. So we've done a tremendous amount of archival research. We're going to do some field work and some more archival work in France in mid-March. Again, with the idea of trying to locate isolated burial sites, also perhaps to give some of these guys their name back, the ones that are already buried as unknowns in American cemeteries in France, to be able to put a little rosette on the wall that indicates this man has been found or has been identified. And then they can change the headstone and actually put his name on it instead of him being an unknown. I also assist academic researchers. I just got through a couple of months ago doing some work for a guy who was finishing up a master's degree in military history in the United Kingdom. He didn't have enough time to come back across the Atlantic to do some final research, so he contacted me, asked me if I could do it for him. It took me about 2 days to get him what he needed, but that saved him another flight across the Atlantic and back. So I do a good bit of that. I work with authors from time to time if they need some background research for a book project, something like that. That's the basics of what researchers do. Well, why you want to hire a researcher? Everything's online these days, or so a lot of people believe, at least, or the younger generations believe. If it's not online, it's not worth knowing. I would beg to differ with that. For example, you have to have some credentials to be a researcher. If you can't just walk into the National Archives and order up a pile of documents, you have to take a little training course. It's only about 20 or 30 minutes, but you got to do it every year to have your researcher credentials. And then it also helps to build a rapport with the archivist so that when I walk in, they know me by name, and I'm much more likely to get a little cooperation than I'm just somebody that they've never seen before. So that helps a little bit. Experience. If you've never dealt with National Archives documents, you got to know how they're organized. You've got to know where and how to search, because not everything is in one place. The National Archives has centers all over the country. The big one is in Washington, D.C. and in suburban Maryland, but there are centers in Atlanta, St. Louis, Kansas City, out on the West Coast. They're everywhere, all over the country. And each one of them has its own specialty or its own regional focus for the types of documents that they have. Obviously, not everything is digitized. So, in fact, the vast majority of archival resources for NARA, National Archives and Records Administration, have not been digitized. And I am told by people who know that it will be decades before they finish digitizing what they have in their collection now. But they get new stuff every year. So it's an ongoing process. So you'll probably never see everything digitized except for things that are, as they call it, born digital. So if it is created electronically, it's a pretty easy transfer. If it's not, and it's on paper, that's a different story. Researchers can be very focused. I like to work with my clients. What do you want? Are there any specific things you want? Or am I just going fishing for everything I can find? So I can help you get something that is relevant to the questions that you're asking. So, and good researchers will do that. Quality, I can give you high resolution scans, I can give you high resolution digital photographs of the artifacts or the documents if that's what you want, so that you're not there with a cell phone trying to take pictures as quickly as you can. A lot of people do that, and cell phones are much better now than they used to be at that. And it's cost effective. Paying me sometimes is cheaper than someone traveling to the archives themselves, taking the little 30-minute training course, lodging, food, etc. They wind up paying more to get the same thing than they would have paid if they just hire a researcher. So it can be very cost effective for them as well. So where do I work? I've mentioned most of the places in NARA. I've also worked at the Library of Congress. Really cool stuff. One of the last times I was there, I opened up a photo album that had belonged to General Billy Mitchell, if you know who he was. Basically one of the forefathers of the U.S. Air Force. Really cool pictures from World War I. So you never know what you're going to find. When I was doing my dissertation research, I happened across a little note that was signed by George Washington. He was sort of attesting to the character of someone who had a case before a claims commission. And so I've actually handled paper that was signed by Jefferson, Washington, Madison, Monroe, all the biggies of the early Republic period. State and local libraries or archives. I do a lot of work at Tennessee State Library and Archives in Nashville, for example. I've worked at other state and local libraries. University special collections are also a great place to look. You never know where you're going to find something, but a lot of universities have special restricted access research rooms where they have collections of papers, photographs, and that sort of thing that have been donated or acquired over the years. And local historical societies. Never overlook the local historical societies. Sometimes they have some real gems, and I will talk about one of those in just a minute. What kinds of documents can you get? Well, I've dealt a good bit with Civil War pensions, for example. The Union Army, the federal government issued pensions to Civil War veterans. The Confederate States issued state pensions, so you can quite frequently find some sort of pension information that will tell you something about that veteran. Where they served, when they served, were they injured, did they get in trouble, that kind of thing. Spanish-American War, oddly enough, the United States Army did not keep individual personnel files for regular soldiers, but they did maintain individual files for volunteers. So if you have an ancestor that was in the 1st Tennessee Volunteer Infantry, for example, that recruited heavily in Middle Tennessee, we can find his personnel file. They exist in D.C. World War I and World War II is probably where I do most of my work, and that can be anything from unit records, ship's logbooks, personnel files, casualty files if someone was killed in action. There was what they called a casualty file. In World War I, they called it a burial case file. Now it's called an individual deceased personnel file. I do a lot of work in that area. And then there are also photographs, maps, and then film or video. It's surprising sometimes what you can find when you go looking for other things. In my World War I research, I usually go up to the map room and try to find the old trench maps that pertain to the action that some particular person or unit might have been involved in. Here's a couple of examples of Civil War pension records, just to see what you get here. The one on the left is from a man from Northwest Alabama who was actually married while he was still enslaved in 1860. And oddly enough, he and 3 other men with the same last name enlisted in the Union Army in Huntsville, Alabama, wound up in Johnsonville, Tennessee. One of them this particular fellow, William, had been married, and his wife came to Johnsonville. It's a very interesting thing because it tells you a good bit about who these people were, where they lived before they enlisted in the Army, what did they do while they were in the service. And then, oh, sorry about that. See if we can back up one.
Left button should back up.
It should. It's not. Well, okay, there we go. All right. And then widows quite frequently also applied for their late husband's pension or for a continuation of pension benefits. And you see a lot of activity around about 1916, 1917 because President Wilson increased the amount of veterans' pension from $8 a month to $20 a month. And a lot of widows by that time were wanting to get that extra $12 a month, but they still had to go through and prove that they had never remarried in order to be eligible for a continuation of pension benefits. And again, you see lists here. You have to have affidavits from witnesses who knew these people. They also had to list all of the names of all of their surviving children. So treasure trove of information if you want to find out something about a Civil War veteran. Photographs or World War I. This is the 91st Aero Squadron. This picture was taken in France in early August of 1918. There's a lot of stories involved in this picture if you know who's who. Down here is the future squadron commander. He would become commander in September. This is Everett Cook from Memphis. If you're familiar with Cook and his work in the cotton business, and for many, many years, the Cook Convention Center was named after him in Memphis. He became the squadron commander. The short guy right there is Kenyon Roper. I told you I would say something about local historical societies. Kenyon Roper was in the Coast Artillery, transferred to the Air Service, and became an observer. The guy who rode in the back seat, shot the machine guns, took the pictures, navigated the airplane. Well, he and his pilot were shot down and killed in in late September of 1918. We believe he is buried as an unknown in the San Miguel American Cemetery in France, but the family never agreed to the Army's identification, so he's buried as an unknown. We have all the circumstantial evidence we can find, including Captain Roper's diary and his personal photograph album. They popped up in the local historical society in his hometown of Steubenville, Ohio. Steubenville, hometown of Dean Martin. Does that help any? If you didn't need to go there, you'd probably pass right by it and not even know it was there. But again, a wealth of information because now we know where this guy was on what day, what he was thinking about, the pictures he took, the people he knew, and his state of mind in the last few months of his life. There's another guy in here on the far right who went on to become the commanding general of all the U.S. Far East Air Forces. He was Lieutenant George Kenney here. By the time he was finished with his career, he was Major General George Kenney. These guys all knew each other, and Cook and Kenney stayed in. Well, Cook got out, came back in at Kenney's request. They got him a job as a staff officer. He actually left service again in 1946 as a brigadier general. This one's a little hard to see, but it's This is the prisoner officers' quarters. Did you know there was a big POW camp in Crossville, exclusively for enemy officers? Well, there it is, circa 1943, just as it was finishing construction. Tar paper buildings, each officer had his own little individual room. Each officer was allowed to take one enlisted man with him as a personal servant. Everybody else was at the big camp in Tullahoma, at Camp Forest. It was mostly converted to a POW camp, and there were several thousand enlisted men, both German and Italian prisoners, who rotated through Tullahoma at one time or another. Just something I found when I was doing some research for the Camp Forest Foundation, and I thought it was a cool image. You find a lot of individual photographs and personnel files of whoever it may happen to be. We have a big hole in the records for Army and early Air Force personnel. For example, there was a huge fire in St. Louis in 1973 that burned about 80% of the Army, Army Air Force, and early USAF records. But there are still files that exist. The ones that were burned were very carefully dried after that, and 50 years later they are still processing what they call the B files, the burned files. So it never hurts to ask for an Army personnel file, because you never know what you'll get. I've gotten everything from, gee, sorry, nothing there, to one page with crispy edges, to an entire 70-page personnel file. So although you only have a 1 in 5 chance, it really helps. With Navy and Marine Corps, they're almost all there. And it's really interesting to look at some of the pictures. The guy on the left saved his destroyer from sinking during the Battle of Surigao Strait. In the Philippines in 1944. He knew what to do when they took a couple of big holes from a Japanese cruiser. He'd been a welder in a shipyard before the war. So he goes into a flooded compartment, welds patches on the hull, saves his ship from sinking. And for that, he was reluctantly given a promotion to machinist mate second class. It actually took the commanding admiral's intervention to get him a promotion, because the personnel officer for the flotilla said, we don't have any more billets for that. But they persisted. It was really cool to hand this off to this guy's grandson, because he said, holy cow, I heard these stories about my grandpa all my life. They were really true. We didn't believe it, but yes, they're really true. The guy on the right, you'd never think he was a hard-charging Marine. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he didn't swear, but he fought at Tarawa. So you never know what you're going to find. Say again?
I said, didn't smoke, didn't swear, didn't whatever. Sounds like Alvin York in World War I.
Much the same, although this fellow's from Pennsylvania. And finally, some things from casualty files. Again, these are coming out a little dark, but these are for a boy from McMinnville named Chester Kennedy, who was shot down. He was an observer. He was shot down and killed in October of 1918. Their plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire, dropped about 10,000 feet. His remains have never been found. So when we go to France in March, we're going to look at the place that seems to be the most likely spot for his grave and that of his pilot, because reports indicate they were buried by the Germans, but when Graves Registration Service went to look, they couldn't find anything. And that was unfortunately all too common, which is why there's still about 1,100 Americans MIA from 1918. Maps, this is just an operations map for the 81st Infantry Division when they were seizing one of the islands in the Palau group. Everybody's heard of Peleliu if you know anything about the Marine Corps, but nobody knows about the 81st Infantry Division, the Wildcats, who seized another one of the big islands there, Angaur, in September and October of 1944. Lots and lots of these things pop up in the documents. Most of these were formerly classified, so you have to be sure that it says declassified on it somewhere before you can take a picture of it. Otherwise, as I can attest, they will come by and fill you out a naughty sheet. So, and that is it. That's just the briefest of ideas of what people like me can do when someone says, I'd like to know more about something.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you said you're going to go to France and look for a grave from 1918, right?
Correct.
That you're not sure is there. Or
We
where do you start?
have map coordinates. First thing you do, you go to St. Louis and you get the burial case file for that individual.
Okay.
And usually in there will be what they call a grave location blank, and there are several other Graves Registration Service or who work for the Quartermaster Department. You can get usually in there a map coordinate for their last known location. quite frequently, these graves are unlocated. The people who buried these guys knew where they were, but when GRS went back to look for them, they couldn't find anything. Quite frequently, the graves were simply marked with a peg, or they would take one of the man's dog tags, nail it to a peg, stick it in the ground, or they would put the chaplain who performed the service would slip a piece of paper with the particulars on it into a bottle, stick the bottleneck down at the head of the grave. Well, if someone comes along, breaks that bottle, or if the area is fought over back to the map coordinates.
You said he was buried by Germans, right?
Right.
So I guess I just didn't know this. So the Germans, when the war is over, exchanged information
yes,
about
they
where
did.
they buried
They were
our
very
soldiers?
good about exchanging information about where they buried Allied soldiers.
Okay.
There were a number of investigators who went and stayed in Berlin, looked through the German Central Records Office. One of them, in fact, from Michigan, spent a year and a half looking for missing aviators. And part of the time that he was doing that, he was being flown over the old battlefield by a former German fighter pilot. If you're into World War II aviation, you've probably heard of Ernst Udet. Yes. Well, Ernst Udet flew Major Zen around the former battlefield so he could look and see if he could find any wreckage that hadn't yet been recorded. So there are a number of ways that can happen. But we're also going to go to French local archives, because what they called a department, which is like a big county in the U.S., every department was required to keep a record of any soldiers they buried from any army. So those records are still out there. We're going to go look at them.
Wow.
If we can. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yes, ma'am.
Once you find a grave that's unmarked, and think it's a particular soldier or something, do you like have it dug up and DNA testing, or?
The process is rather convoluted. We can, with landowners' permission, do non-invasive search. So we can do ground penetrating radar, limited metal detecting, just to go, okay, there's probably something here. Anything beyond that would require a permit from the French government and supervision by a French government archaeologist. So we can't just go dig. That is highly illegal.
Well, I didn't think
No, but I mean, it's actually even metal detecting is technically illegal, and the French are really beginning to crack down on that now. So we have to be, we're going to be above board about what we do, and we're going to inform the local authorities what we're doing, but we're not going to even begin to think about putting a shovel in the dirt. That not this time. That might be late summer, early fall, next, year after next. We don't know yet, but yes.
Is there a problem with migration of data from software system to software system? At once upon a time there was, and not, when everything was on disk, is now all in the cloud and a system.
I don't deal enough with things that are born digital at this point to know. I still deal in paper and real photographic prints or real film. So I can't tell you that much. I know that in my own personal experience, sometimes when I'm looking at the finding aids that are online, what used to be there isn't there anymore. So now when I find something that I want to keep, I make sure that I save myself a copy, even maybe print out a hard copy of it. And that's going to be one of the problems in the electronic age is when your platform changes, when your software changes, when your operating system changes, sometimes data gets scrambled. Just like you saw here. I thought everything was going to go great. I don't know why it zoomed in on one image instead of both. Oh, okay. Well, that helps explain it. But I had to tweak it several times because it was doing some weird things when I switched from doing this on Linux to doing it on a Windows machine. So yes, there are issues that we have to be aware of. Yes, sir.
Personal note, I don't know, about 20 years ago, suddenly a package showed up from the United States Navy, and it was all the original copies all the originals of my personnel file.
Okay.
Now, I'm assuming that was because they digitized it. You may know or may not.
Probably not. Not.
I mean, the DD-14, the Lee.
How far back? When did you separate from service?
79 was my last.
I'm surprised that they sent you the originals and not copies of them. Now, quite frequently in personnel files, things would be entered in triplicate. So you might have gotten a copy, but there's probably still an original personnel file for you in St. Louis.
Okay.
There should be.
That's what I was curious about.
Right.
Original leave requests and stuff like that.
Sure, and personnel files, as you know, are a wealth of information. When somebody enlisted, where they trained, what ships they served on, what stations they were at. Did they ever miss ship's movement? Did they ever get in trouble? Were they ever sick? Were they wounded? Were they killed? All of those things will appear in the personnel file. So it's a really great place to start, and then you can branch out from there once you have that basic nugget of information. Yes, sir?
You mentioned that you had trouble using a Linux system. It sounds like you use. And I'm just wondering, do you use that because of cybersecurity measures?
Partly because Linux is hacked a whole lot less often than Windows.
Exactly. That's
Which is why I've been migrating to Linux, and I'm still in the middle of the learning curve. There are things that I expect to do by pushing this button that don't work. Because I used Windows for 20 years, and now I'm having to relearn how to do a few things, but it's getting there.
Yeah, it is a very good system. It's less susceptible to cyber attacks.
It is, and I like it for that. Yes, sir.
I have about 2.5 years of active duty for which I haven't been credited. Is that something you do, is research personnel records?
Well, no, it's a serious question. I can access information from military files as long as they are 62 years or older on the day that I filed the request.
I'm not quite that old. I'm almost that old.
Well, but you should be able to apply through a standard form 180. You should be able to apply to St. Louis and get a copy of your records.
Well, my latest records were at the Air Reserve Personnel Center at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver.
Okay.
Microfiche.
Oh, yes.
It's a good question whether.
And I haven't dealt with anything yet that's not archival, because for me as a researcher, the family would have to appoint me as an agent. There's a lot of paperwork to go through. Most of the time, it's just easier for the family to apply for it directly themselves.
Okay.
And eventually, they'll get something. The waiting list now is down from a couple of years to maybe 6 months.
Oh, okay.
So it takes a long time, but you can eventually get it.
Yeah.
And then you could see what they have in St. Louis compared to what you have in your own possession,
Okay.
and find out where the incongruities are.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else from anybody? I hope I kept to the time schedule.
You did.
Is
Okay.
St. Louis where the salt mine is?
Say again.
St. Louis where the salt mine is?
Actually, a lot of records are stored across the river in Illinois in an old limestone quarry in Valmeyer, Illinois. I've been there a couple of times right at the end of COVID when they were starting to reopen. That was an interesting experience. Well, I have some cards with me if anybody has any other questions. I'll be happy to talk to you for a few minutes after that. But for now, thank you very much for having me.
So, Peter. Yes. So I'm a mortgage lender, so the only records I ever deal with are DD-214s, but I see quite a few of them, and just that document, if you can understand all the shorthand and everything in the details, is a wealth of information. It's amazing. I'm talking to someone
in a discharge.
Yeah, talking to someone about their loan, and then I get the DD-214 and I start reading their service, and I'm like, wow, this, you realize what someone was doing in their service and has it all in there. So it's pretty cool. It's amazing. All right, thank you very much. And Phil, if you'll come on up. So I mentioned 2 weeks ago that I was excited to have our first new member application. I'm even more excited today to be able to induct the first new member of my presidency. So Joseph, if you'll come on up. Oh, where is it? Where'd it go, Andy? Is it hidden? Go and hide it. Hang on, Andy's going to have your slide in just a second. I had it on there from last week, and I hid it in last week's presentation, and it's in there, I promise. It should.
Oh my gosh, it is hidden.
Okay, I did not hide it before I sent it to you. Hold on, Joseph. I promise.
It's okay.
It should be right here.
I'm gonna have to switch to the whole slideshow.
I want you to have your slide up. It's part of the thing, so.
Just so they know who you are.
Yeah. I do have a question. Since you don't have a lapel, do you want me to pin this on your collar? Is that okay to put it through your collar?
Sure, it's
Okay.
fine.
Try it again.
Hey, there we go.
All right.
All right. So Phil is our assistant governor coordinator.
Yes.
And is past president. So he always has the honor of reading our induction wording for our club.
Yep. So,
Fellow Rotarians and honored guests, today we celebrate a meaningful moment in our club, and that is the induction of a new member into the Rotary Club of Murfreesboro. Joseph, it is our great pleasure to welcome you into our Rotary family. You are joining a global network of more than 1.2 million Rotarians in over 200 countries, and these people are united by friendship and by our shared commitment to service above self. Membership in Rotary is both an honor and a responsibility. It represents your willingness to serve others, to uphold the highest ethical standards, and to take action to make a lasting difference in our community and around the world. Rotary's vision is simple yet powerful. Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our community, and in ourselves. As a Rotarian, you are invited to contribute your time, talents, and leadership through Rotary's 5 avenues of service: club service, vocational service, community service, international service, and youth service. These areas remind us that Rotary is more than just a meeting. It's about people of action turning compassion into service. So, here's